I think he's been standing in the sun too long. It's Rich Stevens on 850 WFTL. Here's Rich.
Coming up in just a few minutes, we got a hold of a piece of audio that's pretty incredible. It's a husband that's been charged with his wife's murder, and he's talking to a 911 operator saying that he stabbed her. The problem is they don't really understand each other. He's calling from Parkland, so it's here in South Florida. He tells the police dispatcher that he has an emergency, and the 911 operator says, do you need police or paramedics? And he says both. And he was charged in the murder of Dakota Stewart Dick, who worked at the Palm Beach State College. But during this call, he tells the dispatcher that he and his wife were fighting, and then he says, I think I accidentally stabbed her with a knife. And the dispatcher says, you did what with a knife? It's a pretty incredible, intense call at that, too. We'll play that for you coming up in just a few minutes. But first, I wanted to go to our friend Brad Robinson, who is the senior partner at the Millennium Group, a full-service private investigations agency that's staffed by all former federal agents. If you want to get in touch with them, you can call 855-SPY-TEAM, or you can check out their website at millenniumgroup2001.com. Brad, how are you today?
Good morning, Rich.
Listen, last time we talked to you, I think it was last week or the week before, you seemed to have been very tight-lipped on the questions or the responses that we were trying to ask you about this missing flight. Was there a reason for that?
Well, part of it was just frustration, which we're seeing being played out now, certainly on a larger stage with the slowness of the investigation and the unwillingness of some of the parties, specifically Malaysia, to be more forthcoming in terms of doling out critical information.
So speaking of that critical information, Brad, do you buy the story that the Malaysian government has told us?
No, I think there's more to the story. There's still more to the story than we've heard, Rich. And I think their motivations for not being more forthcoming have something to do with covering their own backsides to some degree, but there may be even more to it than that.
Why, at this point, I would have bet my life on Monday, when this information was released by the Malaysian Prime Minister, I literally would have bet my life that sometime within the next few hours, somebody from our government would have come out and spoken about the announcement that they said. And yet nobody in our government at all made any comment on this whatsoever since this announcement was made.
Well, I thought the way that the announcement was framed was a little bit surprising. Normally, and I don't know if this is the case where he was actually being more frank than he intended to be, but you'll notice that, especially in this country, whenever there's a disaster or anything along these lines, where the question is, are there survivors or where are the survivors, that kind of thing, they usually definitely lean toward in the direction of caution in terms of leaving that door open a crack, even if they think there very, very likely are no survivors. They will say, that's still to be determined. We're keeping our fingers crossed, et cetera, that kind of thing. Whereas this guy just essentially blurted out, without using exactly these words, everybody's dead, which kind of shocked me.
Yeah, it shocked a lot of people. It also shocked a lot of people, including me, that the way they notified the families was via text message.
Yeah, very, very cold, and you would think, especially now. I mean, it's one thing that they'd stubbed their toes, meaning the Malaysian government. They had so many missteps in the first 72 hours. You would think, once that backlash started, I mean, for gosh sake, they're protesting in Beijing in front of the Malaysian embassy, and protests in Beijing don't happen that often these days. I can promise you.
Yeah.
So with that kind of backlash, you'd think that their PR people, presumably they have some, would be all over future decisions and future announcements and so forth to try to mitigate some of the damage that's been done. But it's just blunder after blunder with them.
Now, do you believe? Well, let me back up. The story. The other thing that was also weird, Brad, is that the company that they say, this UK company that came up with this new technology that's never been used before, that did this mathematical equation that said that the plane went down in the Indian Ocean and there were definitely no survivors. The weird part about this day on Monday is that that company said pretty much the exact opposite of what the Malaysian Prime Minister said. Whereas he gave the credit to them, they turned it around and said, well, we can't guarantee any of this. So the words that the Malaysian government said were not the same as what this company in the UK said, which adds even more, I guess you could say, mystery to this whole thing, because who's telling the truth, if anyone?
Right. Again, another example of the Malaysian government, instead of choosing their words carefully, they're making announcements that may cause them further grief in the future. So this has been quite a learning experience for everyone, particularly the people running the Malaysian government.
All right. Well, listen. Let me put you on hold 1 second. I want to replay this audio of the Malaysian Prime Minister because, again, sometimes, and I'm sure you have more experience with this than I do, you can read between the words, and sometimes you can't. And this was very interesting, the way he chose his words, as you said.
It is therefore with deep sadness and regret that I must inform you that according to this new data, flight MH370 ended in the southern Indian Ocean.
Now, that's the words of the Malaysian Prime Minister. Is there anything that you could read between these words?
Well, to me, that's essentially announcing the deaths of everybody on board without specifically saying so, which I think is, for a couple of reasons, is a mistake on the Prime Minister's part. And you're right, the people responsible for that data took a much different approach. Again, whether it's for political reasons or reasons of sensitivity or whatever, they're nowhere near that willing to come up with that kind of final declaration that everybody's dead. They're just saying we have this new data that we believe could be very valuable to the investigation, and it needs to be checked out, which is what's being done now.
Okay, so let me go back to my original question I had asked you last week, and let's see if we get the same response. You do believe that we don't have all the information. What's your gut telling you that is going on here? Do you believe that this plane went down in the Indian Ocean, and do you find it at all odd that another thing that was very odd is that the Prime Minister didn't take questions after that huge statement? And he said we'd have a press conference within 24 hours, which still hasn't happened. And now the next day, they're showing satellite images of 122 potential objects, one of which is 75 feet long and appears to be solid. If this turns out to be the plane, do you find the timing weird at all on any of this?
I do find it strange, and but beyond just being a PR nightmare for them, I think in the weeks and months that follow, we're going to learn more about what's really behind all this. And I don't mean just the cause of the crash, which is number one on our minds, but I think there's some other intrigues at play here that we're going to learn more about as we go along. Back to your other question regarding the Indian Ocean. No, in fact, when we first talked about this a couple of weeks ago, Rich, and at that point they were saying that it looked like the plane had gone, or they were suspecting that the plane had gone in an arc either to the northwest or the southwest. You asked me which I was leaning toward, and I said the south, simply because it's compared to the north, where they have to fly over populated areas and various military installations and radar sites and so forth. That Indian Ocean is so large, so desolate, so many hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of open space that made a lot more sense to me. And that's obviously the way the investigation is leaning right now. I've actually been on several occasions in the Indian Ocean. And when people say, well, wait a minute, how could it be out there? How could debris be out there that long without having been discovered? But it is just so vast and so far from any populated areas, some portions of it. And you can literally sail for days and days and days without seeing another ship or even an aircraft in the sky. It's that desolate and that isolated, and you often see wreckage. And that's another thing. People say, well, so the wreckage is there. Why can't they just fly in there and find it? Well, there's a lot of wreckage. I mean, there's all kinds of debris floating out there. It's a junkyard on water. So to find the right wreckage, and also as far as that satellite imagery, another complaint that I've heard is that, okay, now they got the satellite imagery, why can't they just fly to those coordinates and get our answers for us? But that information from the satellites is days old, and there are very strong currents in that part of the Indian Ocean, high winds. So that debris, if it's still floating, which it may or may not be, could have shifted hundreds of miles in any direction. So it's quite a task.
So it's very possible this 75-foot long image that they're seeing that they claim is solid might not have anything to do with this plane whatsoever.
Exactly. It would not be shocking to see. In a couple of days sailing in the Indian Ocean, you might see half a dozen chunks of debris that are approximately those dimensions and would have nothing to do with this crash. So that in itself is not that specifically encouraging. But I am optimistic and hopeful, of course, that they are homing in on it. One thing I think is worth mentioning, Rich, I don't know if you've brought it up yet, but and I don't want to get too far from the main story here, but I find it interesting, and I don't know if people made this connection yet in their mind, but I know you find as interesting as I do the whole NSA cell phone spying story. And when that was a hot topic, and now it's back in the news, but the whole topic of metadata came up, which a lot of people found confusing. And I think an interesting parallel to this story is that satellite imagery is, in essence, metadata. There are many, many satellites up there controlled by a number of different countries, and they're constantly, thousands of each satellite, thousands of photographs per minute, every day, 365 days a year. That's metadata. There's no way that any person or any company or government can constantly sift through all those photographs that are taken on a day-to-day basis. But it's there in case it's needed, as was the case here. That's metadata they were able to go back to, much the same as they'd be able to go back, the NSA would, or at least could in the past, go back to a specific person's call records days or weeks, months, years after the fact to try to find connections there that could be useful in investigation. This is a case where those satellite images would have probably never been seen by a human being had they not needed to go back specifically to check for a specific area during a specific time frame. So I think that's the kind of connection that some people maybe need to make in their mind, the way that metadata can be very valuable in an investigation.
So with that said, do you still believe that this is the finality for this, that the plane did indeed crash into the Indian Ocean as they're telling us?
I do, but again, the key question here is why. There are half a dozen different theories or more about, even if they find it in the next 10 minutes, that the mystery is not solved by any means.
Okay, I'm sure you're familiar with the website Lignet, right?
Yes.
Is it odd to you that this story fell off of that website?
Yeah, actually, my partner and I were talking about that just this morning. It certainly begs the question of whether there's some outside influences are at work here.
So what do you think? What is it?
I think somebody's pressuring somebody.
So there's definitely more to the story still.
I believe so, yes, Rich.
All right, we're talking to Brad Robinson from the Millennium Group. If you want to get in touch with Brad, 855 SPY Team. It's a full-service private investigations agency staffed by former federal agents. You want the job done, these are the guys that have the experience. And before I let you go, Brad, can you tell me anything about the so-called military training that's going on here from the DOD? That originally we were told it's 2 days, it's in Broward County. Now we're getting reports that it's going up as far as Port St. Lucie and all the way the other direction into Miami. And it's also being told that it's the entire week, when in fact it started last Friday or Saturday. What's going on? Do we know?
We don't know, Rich, and I think it is an interesting question, especially in these times when there are so many efforts afoot to reduce military spending budgets. This is a very, very expensive training exercise, and rather than reduce it and trying to cut costs as they are in many other areas of the DoD, here we have them expanding it significantly and consequently spending a lot more taxpayer dollars.
Now, I know somebody that was actually invited, and I'm sworn to secrecy on who this person is. He was invited to watch some of the training yesterday, and it happened. Most of it's been done at night, I guess, for obvious reasons. And he was able to watch for 47 minutes, and at that point they told him he had to leave because the next part he wasn't allowed to see. What does that say?
Well, obviously some of what they're doing they consider to be highly classified. Now, it would be strictly conjecture on my part to say that might have something to do with combating urban unrest, to put it one way, but that's one theory.
Yeah, there's definitely some stuff going on, but the thing is, aren't there normal people like you and me? Well, you're not the normal one. I guess I'm not either. But I mean, they're doing it in urban areas where people are. So aren't there some people that are seeing these things happen and do they just not realize it or not know, or is there something I'm missing here?
Presumably the more classified operations, exercises are being done as far away from the public eye as possible. But you're right, if it's set up to be done in an urban setting, inevitably they're going to be. You can only cordon off so much area in any metropolitan district. So I'm sure there's some things being seen that they'd rather not have seen. But unless you want to conduct your exercises in the middle of the desert, that's inevitable.
Yeah, incredible stuff. Brad Robinson from the Millennium Group. Always a pleasure to have you on. MillenniumGroup2001.com. Thanks so much. And do me a favor, call me if you get more information too, because obviously we want to get some kind of closure on this story.
Will do, Rich.
Thanks so much. I do appreciate it.
Bye.
You're listening to the Rich Stevens Show on 850 WFTL. Now, wouldn't you say that he was not as tight-lipped this time? He was more open and forthcoming?
Well, we had more specifics to ask him, but yes, he was more open and forthcoming.
Almost like it was a different person. Pretty incredible. 877-850-8585. Coming up next after a quick break, we're going to talk to somebody that we're not supposed to be hearing from. That's got some inside information on the need-to-know list here in South Florida. This is just incredible stuff right here on 850 WFTL. 850 WFTL. 850 WFTL.